The net might be neutral now, but we're not on implicit bias. I'm your host, Kevon Bordelon. Welcome into Hour 2, which is always more fun. The penultimate segment of this week's episode. That means it is the second to last segment for this episode of Implicit Bias. Great crew here in the Mr. Lester's TSPL this week. At the bar, we've got Burley, Short Pour Pellerin, Brian, Hold Harmless Harmon, and then in the chairs, Caleb Morse, the rustic renegade himself, and me, Kevon Bordelon. Okay. So, what, Caleb?
I raised the glass to myself, and Walker was like, this son of a gun.
Caleb toasting himself
He
again.
didn't mouth it, but I saw it in his face. He was like, you know what?
He didn't even toast us over here,
Yeah.
Brian.
Walker's like, one day, I'm going to be that guy.
Oh, yikes. Okay, so
Sorry.
that's all right. We'll get back on track here sooner or later. Anyway, recent appeals court puts net neutrality back in play. Big headline came out. You can find it, New York Post. A appeals court ruled basically that the government, and I'm trying to translate this into just regular, normal speak as possible, that the government has to treat all internet users the same. That's kind of the net, as opposed to the government getting in control and speeding up internet for some people, slowing it down for others, censoring certain internet for certain people. And look, some states, it's fine. It's happening. California has some rules that are in play. That's fine, because this was a federal ban on net neutrality that was instituted by the Biden administration. Now they say, nope, if you're on the internet, everybody has to be treated the same. This is what I find fascinating about it, though. This appeals court used a very recent Supreme Court ruling to say, oh no, the administration can't put this rule into play. Anybody want to take a guess at what recent ruling was utilized? How about the destruction of the Chevron deference?
Really?
So it's not a law. The administration was not utilizing a law to try and restrict and to basically censor internet access. They were using a government administration, right?
Yeah, white paper.
Correct. Well, it wasn't even, I don't even know that it was a white paper, right? It was just a divisional.
It was a practiced action. We'll call
Yeah,
it.
yeah. It was a practiced action. And they said, well, we get to determine this because our branch of the government says so.
This is how it's interpreted.
Correct. And the Third Circuit said, nope, you don't get to do that because the Chevron deference was struck down. You were using the Chevron deference to create the restrictions on the internet, and now it's wide open again. I love this. I've actually found a way to render the crew here in the TSPL speechless.
Well, this is one of the topics that you did not send us.
Correct. I did not send this one. I did not. But this is a big one.
So
The
you're
Chevron
hitting
deference,
us blind completely here, but
the Chevron deference you should know.
absolutely.
And what it means is the bigger picture and why it's important.
Right.
So what does this mean? What is the larger interpretation of this? The larger interpretation of this is being able to look at someone like the IRS and saying, okay, is this your interpretation of the law, Internal Revenue Service,
Well,
or is this actually in the law? Because if it's your interpretation, you can no longer use the Chevron deference to create that interpretation.
Well, and that's the application. That's what we've been trying to narrow it down to, is when we look at interpretation of the law is not the law.
Correct.
Right? And individual, not even branches, but arms of the government, how they interpret the law must coincide with how the law is read and interpreted by the Supreme Court. Because there are many, many divisions that do not do that and do not follow certain guidelines. And the executive branch, let me use them as an example, might direct them to operate outside of a certain understanding or interpretation of the law.
Certain definition that might be written in the law.
So now I love to see this go cross-platform, because the platform that I want to see it in is mine, right? Because When we go to the ATF, the ATF director has recently stepped down on the 18th, this is his last day, because he realizes he messed up, and that the interpretation of the law that they were given and they were allowed to use is not what the law says. And I'm very tired of all these different arms of the government branches interpreting the law at their own whim and their own way.
Burley, you were going to chime in there for a second?
I'm going to paraphrase this as best I can. In my prior life, as an assistant administrator of a hospital, right? One of the accrediting bodies
Yep.
is Joint Commission.
Yep.
Okay.
Joint Commission audits are gospel in healthcare.
Okay. And it is. And you want to be a JCAHO
You want to be accredited. Correct.
facility. The big hullabaloo about the whole thing is that each entity, each hospital should have a policy and procedure manual, which is basically your Bible for that facility on your policies and practices. What you do or what you say you do should be verifiable in what you actually do, and that's what they go by.
Okay.
I'm reaching a little bit just by saying that if your facility says that this is what you do, you should be able to demonstrate in your files, in your practices, that that is what you do. Caleb, you kind of have the same thing, right?
It's the same thing where if you say you're going to do X, you do X.
You do it.
And here's the empirical data where X has been done.
And it's not even a question about whether or not you're doing it right or your policy is right. They're not judging your policy. They will eventually judge your policy. They'll direct you, or whatever governing body you use, Caleb, will direct that. But if you say you're doing this, then you should be doing it. And if you're not doing it, then why are you doing it? Because then you're going to get dinged. This is that case where now we have these branches, these divisions, right?
Yep.
That can interpret something, but it's not practical.
It's not in the manual.
It's not in the manual. It's
Correct.
It's not even verifiable.
And what they are saying, to clarify what Burley's saying here, is, to your point, it's not verifiable. Basically what they're saying is, well, it's not written in the law, which means we can do whatever we want because it doesn't say we can. It doesn't say we can't. So we're just going to do whatever we want.
And that's unacceptable.
Correct.
It's unacceptable, certainly at a healthcare level. It's certainly unacceptable at Caleb's level. It's unacceptable in insurance. It's unacceptable in brokerage. It's unacceptable to have your own version.
This is the best part, because Burley, what you're calling out is what we haven't necessarily put into words, but I'm going to do it right here and right now. The destruction of the Chevron deference, and this case backing it up and citing the destruction of the Chevron deference, it neuters. It cuts off the balls of bureaucrats who are unelected, think they're better than us, and think they get to create whatever law they want. That's what it does. It takes those bureaucrats by the short and curlies and snips them right off. Because now the only thing they can do is what's written in the law. And if it's not in the law, now the Supreme Court says this isn't in the law, and it makes the lawmakers do their job to either fix it or to go, maybe we overstepped.
Well, and I want the accountability we're supposed to have.
That's a whole nother discussion about whether people get accountable or can they not do it.
You're focused on doing what. Believe me, I was in your shop the other day.
It is so ridiculous on how by the letter we have to be, and the problem is the letter isn't the letter of the law; it's the letter of the interpretation of the person who happens to be there and working that 9 to 5, right? So, if you give me a directive and you tell me the law says this, we'll do that.
Right.
And that's the problem, is a moving target's really hard to hit. And that's what I love about this, is it doesn't make the target stationary, but it makes it move less.
Correct. The target effectively is stationary until the target is rebuilt in a new location.
Right.
So now lawmakers actually have to do what they're supposed to do.
Shielded, of course, in a new location, shielded in a bomb-proof.
Yeah, but that's the whole point, right? I mean, the law The law should not be able to be manipulated at the whim of some unelected government worker. Let's be brutally honest. There should not just be some guy who made it out of his mom's basement for 35 minutes that day to show up to work and go, oh, I don't like the way this is done. I'm going to give a 1-minute finger and tell those guys they got to go to, oh, yeah, I was talking about Walker. Anyway, we will take a break. We will come back. The final segment of this week's episode, where we're going to have a little fun because Kavan found a toy that he wants on this week's episode of Implicit Bias.